Mr. Cruz was employed by Cultural Surveys Hawai'i and was the primary author of that Exhibit 44. It was a 15-page document, and as he has attested to in his witness direct testimony, which is 2 pages, and it is Exhibit B57, that when his testimony is that he was asked to remove the recommendation of no, which appears on page 12 of B44, which is that the project not be pursued, as there were no mitigation measures that could address the adverse impact. And so his testimony goes to his interaction with the Office of Environmental Quality Control and in support of his original draft report and his objection to the draft EIS that was promulgated by the Office of Environmental Quality Control in this project, an excerpt of which we have submitted as Exhibit B45. So these 3 exhibits were all presented to the court in our moving papers.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aluli. Sir, may I ask you to state your name into the microphone?
My name is Brian Cruz.
And Mr. Cruz, may I ask you to take the oath, please? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matters before this tribunal shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Cruz, you heard Ms. Aluli refer to a written direct testimony. Do you happen to have that in front of you?
I do.
And as to this written direct testimony, are those your statements?
Yes, Your Honor.
And sir, as you sit here under oath, do you affirm that the statements in this written direct testimony are in fact true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
I do, and they are true.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I was working for Cultural Service Hawaii, and I think I started in 2007. And one of the first big projects I got was for the super ferry as it approached Nauwiliwili Harbor on Kauai. That project was problematic in its own sense, and the problems we received from that project helped me prepare to do this Mauna Kea project for the 30-meter telescope. So in late 2008, early 2009, I was tasked with doing the 30-meter telescope cultural impact assessment. And after 6 months of research and interviewing community consultants, cultural practitioners from Hawaii Island, the conclusion of my research, based on what the community had said and based on what the research had said, indicated a no further action on the summit of Mauna Kea because of the sacredness of the site. So in my cultural impact assessment, I made a recommendation of no further action, along with 9 other recommendations or mitigation measures. And I submitted that preliminary draft to Jim Hayes of Parsons Brinkerhoff. I believe it was in March of 2009. A few days later, Jim Hayes called me back and demanded that I remove the no further action recommendation on top of the draft CIA. I refused to remove it. And in doing so, Jim Hayes or Parsons Brinkerhoff, whoever, they took out all my recommendations. And on March 9th, 2009, they published a draft EIS for the 45-day commentary period without my recommendations, including the do not build. It was sometime later, when they published the final EIS in 2010, in May, the recommendations were put back in. When I noticed the discrepancy between the two, I had made a complaint to the Office of Environmental Quality Control on the fact that Parsons Brinkerhoff had taken out those recommendations. They told me that there was not much they could do because Parsons Brinkerhoff owned the intellectual property rights for the draft EIS, including my CIA. So after doing some research before I got here today, according to Hawaii Administrative Rules, HAR 11-200-17, it states that the draft EIS is required to include the mitigation measures and alternative measures or alternative actions. So I believe that they should have left my recommendations in as required by law, which is stated in this document, Chapter 11-200. And that's why I'm here today.
And how many cultural assessments, impact assessments have you done?
I'm going to guess that number's around 40 to 50.
And I'd like to explore a little bit about what your experience has been in the past. Have you ever had a cultural impact assessment returned to you for revision or removed altogether in the past?
We always do revisions on cultural impact assessments to meet the basic minimum requirements, but never have I been asked to remove recommendations. This is the one and only project.
Out of 50 or so that you've done?
Yes, it's unheard of in our industry.
What was your experience with that? Did you push back on that?
Yeah, we were surprised. I was surprised that we would conduct 6 months of research, come up with 10 recommendations to offset the mitigation for this project, and to be asked to have them all removed was literally unheard of. And we refused to remove it, and we sent them a version of the report in a locked PDF so they could not manipulate the data. So if I recall correctly, I submitted it on a Friday afternoon, which was our deadline. And on Sunday evening, Jim Hayes from Parsons Brinkerhoff called me up, pleading with me to take out that one recommendation of no further action. And I believe he was going to show it the next day to the TMT group. And I refused to remove it, and I checked with my supervisor at the time, which was Lisa Gollin, and we agreed to leave it in there because that was the truth of the results of this research.
And so were you surprised when it was taken out of the locked PDF and changed when you saw it in the draft?
Excuse me, please do not answer that. Where are we going? Because I think he's asked, I mean, why do we have to know whether he was surprised or not?
Okay. Why do you think this is important?
Well, according to HAR 11-200-17, which are the rules for environmental impact statements, it is required to be in that document. And in doing so, by leaving it in, other agencies and the community get to weigh on those results. And during the 45-day commentary period, they have an opportunity to address them. By them not being in there means that after 45 days, we will not have a single comment on the no further action, including the gentleman that testified before me. If I heard him correctly, he read the draft EIS that had none of the recommendations on, and he may have granted an approval because none of that information was in there.
I see. We also saw an exhibit that was produced by the university and put up on the wall that showed a letter from SHPE saying that they had reviewed the draft EIS as well. If the State Historic Preservation Division did not have access to the cultural impact assessment, do you believe that their recommendation might also have been missing some important information?
Please do not answer. This witness is not qualified to speak for SHPE.
Okay. Do you believe that agencies reviewing the draft EIS and making comments should have access to all of the information?
I believe that any agency that is going to make a decision, they need all the information. And by leaving that information out, they could make the wrong decision.
May I ask, how did the population of those initially interviewed get selected?
Whenever we have a project in any ahupua'a, we have to figure out who we can contact. So we try to cultural connection to Mauna Kea. Normally, when we do a project, let's say in the ahupua'a of Kaneohe, people actually live in the project area or near the project area. But for this one, because it's Mauna Kea, the summit, and no one probably lives up there, we expanded our search to anyone that could make a cultural connection to Mauna Kea.
Okay, so I guess the next question I should ask you is, was whether a person was pro-astronomy or not, was that a category for selection?
That's a great question. The criteria that we use is for anyone that's knowledgeable about Mauna Kea, has some type of history with Mauna Kea, does cultural practice on Mauna Kea, and not so much whether they support the project or not. But if they do support the project and they want to give testimony to that, we forward them to Jim Hayes and let Jim Hayes include them in the EIS, and not so much the cultural impact assessment.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
You're welcome.
You said, just in your oral testimony, that you did actually attempt to report this to the OEQC, Office of Environmental Quality Control. And what exactly was their answer?
They said that there was a gray area between Parsons Brinkerhoff having intellectual property rights to the entire EIS document, which means that they could manipulate the data in their favor, I suppose.
Does that also include the mo'olelo of the people who were interviewed?
I believe so, yeah. If they wanted to change it, I'm pretty sure they would change it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Did all of CSH, Cultural Surveys Hawaii, support the decision of keeping the recommendations in?
Cultural Service Hawaii supported me.
And is it, I mean, because basically this is your guys' best management practices and your reputation on the line, correct?
Yes.
So Debbie began to ask you this question, but let me just ask it in this way. You said the PDF was locked and then somehow it was unlocked, is that correct?
It wasn't unlocked. What they did was they printed it, and now that they had the physical copy, they removed the recommendations part and then digitized that. So from a reader standpoint, you may not be able to tell that the document was manipulated.
Did he also say that there were other Hawaiians that they had, that they would interview themselves?
What he said was, after my first draft CIA, the majority of participants did not support the TMT. So he contacted us with a list of names that included Native Hawaiian people that supported the TMT, and he wanted us to conduct interviews with them to show a balanced report. But doing cultural impact assessments is not designed to do balanced reporting. It's designed to find impacts. So we disagreed with the process of having us interview an additional set of Native Hawaiians that supported it. But nonetheless, we did. And when we did it, we made a separate section that was different from the other Native Hawaiians that we interviewed. And we gave it a heading that said, the following people have been interviewed at the request of Parsons Brinkerhoff to show both positive and negative support for the project, which we completely disagreed, but we did it anyway.
I see. So they provided you with their own names of people.
Right. The idea was to give a balanced report.
The purpose of a cultural impact statement is to determine the impact or the negative impact to those whom the action would affect. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So is it true that they took it out, right? They took out the recommendations, But didn't they also put them back in after?
They did. I believe the final was posted on May 9th, 2010, with all the recommendations put back in. But at that point, that's after the fact. No one got a chance to comment on it on that at that point. So I completely disagree with that.
Would that be considered, not a best management practice?
Yes, I believe the final EIS does not have the integrity of every other project that we contributed to.
Because not all of the information is provided to those who are decision makers, is that correct?
Correct, but not all the information, but the most important information from this CIA was removed. So I understand taking out bits and pieces here and there, but they took out the teeth from that CIA that I wrote.
Okay.
What's left is just a document that has research and interviews in it.
But no basis for the actual findings,
Yeah,
right?
no conclusion, no recommendations, no teeth, If you work on a project that involves the most sacred site in the Pacific Ocean, and there's nothing,
Mr.
no
Cruz,
recommendations.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to focus and answer the question rather than to elaborate, please.
All right, sorry.
Thank you.